The sun in Garland, Texas, can be merciless. On a late Saturday morning, the heat pressed down on the pavement as though it wanted to erase footsteps. But for Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the heat was not a concern. What mattered that morning was the look on her nephew Devon's face when she dangled a set of car keys before him and said, "Put your shoes on. We're going shopping." He blinked, still groggy from sleep, and asked, "Shopping for what?" Jasmine smiled. "You'll see, but wear something decent. We're not going to the mall." It was a moment of joy, of quiet family intimacy, the kind that seasoned lives are built on. Devon had no idea what his aunt was planning. He did not know she had spent nights scrolling through listings, looking for the right car to help him drive to school, and his part-time job. He did not know how much she longed to see him sit behind the wheel of something reliable, something that would carry him safely into his own independence. They pulled up to Flagstone Auto Group, a local dealership with a reputation for fair prices and clean pre-owned cars. Inside, the air was cool, the floors polished, salespeople moving with rehearsed smiles. Nothing looked unusual. Yet, hidden in that quiet space was a storm waiting to break, because as Jasmine stepped inside, she was not just a woman buying a car for her nephew. She was a black congresswoman in a land that still struggled to accept what that meant. She was walking into a space where some would see her not as a customer, not even as a neighbor, but as a symbol they had already decided to reject. And the rejection came swiftly. A man in a red cap, letter stitched, bold and white across its front, stepped forward. His eyes lingered on her face. Then her nephew's, then back again. And then came the words that cut across the air sharper than the Texas heat outside. "We don't serve politicians here who disrespect this country." The room did not erupt. It froze. Salespeople glanced sideways. A woman at the coffee machine stopped mid-pour. Devon shifted uneasily, unsure why the air felt heavier. But Jasmine understood. She had felt this weight before in courtrooms, in panel discussions, in airports, where suspicion followed her like a shadow. And she did what her grandmother had once taught her. She straightened her shoulders, gathered her dignity, and said simply, "Come on, Dev, we're not staying." No shouting, no scene, no argument, only silence that rang louder than outrage. It would have been easy to erupt, easy to fight fire with fire. But Jasmine knew that sometimes the loudest sound is the sound you refuse to make. And so, she walked out, leaving behind not weakness, but a question that would linger in the minds of everyone who watched. Why did a woman have to leave a dealership? Not because of money, not because of credit, but because of who she was. For those who know history, that question is not new. How many times have black men and women been told not here, not for you? How many times has silence been used as a weapon against them, only for them to turn that silence into a shield of dignity? From Montgomery buses to lunch counters in Greensboro, from South African voting lines to Caribbean uprisings, silence has never been passive. It has been a stage, and sometimes the act of walking away has been the first step in making the ground itself tremble. That day in Garland was not just about a car. It was about a legacy. It was about showing a young black boy that dignity under fire is its own kind of victory. It was about reminding a community that injustice does not always come with shackles. It can come with a salesman's smirk. And it was about what would happen next when Jasmine's husband, Nathaniel, chose not to answer insult with anger, but with presence, with quiet power, with a lesson in class that money cannot buy. Stay with us, because this is not just another story. This is the future our ancestors dreamed of. A story of rejection turned into resilience. A story of silence that spoke louder than rage. A story of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who walked away with her head held high, and in doing so, taught us that grace can echo longer than hate. The story begins not with the car lot, nor with the man in the red cap, but with the soil beneath Garland, Texas. This is land that has carried histories. Most people prefer to forget. It is land where cotton once grew, and black laborers bent under the weight of fields they did not own. It is land where segregation did not vanish. It simply put on a new suit, a new law, a new polite smile. And it is into this land that Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was born, raised, and later returned, carrying both the scars of history and the fire of resilience. Jasmine Crockett was not just any woman walking into Flagstone Auto Group. She was a lawyer, turned legislator, a voice that had sharpened itself in the courtrooms of Texas, where justice often felt like a coin flipped by those already holding the power. She was a woman who had stood before Congress with nothing more than a suit, a microphone, and words that cut through hypocrisy like steel. And yet, in that dealership on Jupiter Road, none of that mattered. To the man in the red cap, she was simply someone to be rejected, dismissed, pushed aside. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, we must step back. Because history does not begin with an insult, it begins with a pattern. Texas has always been a place of contradictions. It boasts of freedom, yet its soil remembers chains. It sells the dream of wide highways and opportunity, yet too often closes the gates to those who do not fit the mold of power. For generations, black families in towns like Garland have built lives out of resilience, creating churches, schools, and neighborhoods that became safe havens in a state that rarely offered safety. To be black in Texas is to walk daily with dignity, sharpened by history's knife. That Saturday morning, Jasmine was not thinking of history. She was thinking of her nephew Devon, of giving him a car that would carry him toward independence. She was thinking of his future, but history was waiting for her the moment she stepped through those glass doors. Inside, the dealership gleamed with polished floors and chilled air, but beneath the shine lay something familiar, the quiet hum of power deciding who belonged and who did not. It was the same hum that once decided who could drink at a fountain, who could sit at a lunch counter, who could vote without fear. Now, it was deciding who could buy a car. Devon did not see the storm at first. To him, it was just another Saturday errand with his aunt. He pointed excitedly to a silver sedan, his teenage innocence unshaken. But Jasmine's eyes caught the man in the corner, red-faced, reclining, cap tilted forward, as if daring the world to challenge him. She had seen that look before, not on him, but on countless others who carried the same spirit. It was the look of someone who believed the space belonged to them and them alone. When he rose and crossed the floor, Jasmine already knew. She braced herself, not with anger, but with the calm steel of someone who has weathered too many storms. And when he said the words, "We don't serve politicians here who disrespect this country," she felt the old weight press against her chest. It was not just an insult. It was history reaching forward with new clothes. It was centuries of dismissal, wrapped in a 21st century excuse. It was America saying, yet again, not you. For Devon, this was new. He looked at his aunt. Confusion etched into his young face. Why was she being turned away when she had money? When she had respect? When she had power? But for Jasmine, it was a repetition of an old script. The setting had changed, but the lines were the same. And so she chose silence, because silence, in moments like these, is not surrender. It is strategy. It is the wisdom of ancestors who knew that sometimes walking away preserved more dignity than staying to argue with someone who never planned to listen. The eyes in the room followed her as she guided Devon to the door. Not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to refuse the stage she wanted. Every quiet step she took was a reminder: dignity cannot be denied, even when service is withheld. When they reached the car, Devon's question began. Why would he do that? You didn't even say anything wrong. Jasmine smiled, though the smile carried the heaviness of 1,000 untold stories. Some people don't need a reason. They just need a target. That was the lesson she never wanted him to learn. So young. But life had its own timing. And that day, Garland, Texas, delivered the same bitter medicine it had delivered to countless black families before. What Jasmine did not yet know was that Nathaniel, her husband, would not let the moment end there. Not with shouting, not with vengeance, but with something more lasting. Because history has always taught that dignity is not just about survival. It is about teaching the next generation how to hold their heads high, even when the world tries to push them low. And Nathaniel was about to teach Devon a lesson no classroom could. The ride home that day was silent, but silence does not always mean peace. For Jasmine Crockett, the air in the car carried more weight than the Texas heat outside. Her hands remained steady on the wheel, her face composed, but inside her chest a familiar ache grew stronger. It was the ache of carrying dignity while being disrespected. She had done it before in courtrooms where her arguments were dismissed before she spoke, in interviews where her words were cut short, in airports where suspicion clung to her skin, but this time it was different. This time, her nephew Devon had seen it happen. He fidgeted in the passenger seat, scrolling on his phone without seeing the screen. Finally, he broke the silence. Was that about you being on television? About politics? Jasmine glanced at him, then back at the road. Yeah, probably, but why would he do that? You didn't even say anything wrong. She gave a dry laugh, low and short. Some people don't need a reason. They just need a target. Devon leaned back, troubled but quiet. He was still young, still building the armor that black boys learned to wear in America. But Jasmine saw the crack in his innocence and wished she could shield him longer. She reached across, gave his hand a squeeze, and said softly, "Don't worry about it. We'll find your car somewhere else." Later that afternoon, when Devon went out to play with his cousins, Jasmine sat at the kitchen table with a cold glass of water. She replayed every moment, the look in the man's eyes, the hush in the showroom, the silence that followed her out the door. It was not shame she felt. It was not even anger in the usual sense. It was weariness, like a crack in the floor she had patched 100 times before, only to watch it split open again. She opened her laptop and searched the dealership's website. The manager's name appeared, Cliff Bosworth, arms folded in a staged photograph, grin stretched wide. His cap was not in the photo, but the energy matched. Jasmine stared at the screen until a knock on the door pulled her back. Her husband Nathaniel stepped in, blazer slung over his shoulder. Still in slacks from a meeting in Plano, one look at her face, and he knew something had happened. She told him everything, not dramatically, just the facts, word for word. Nathaniel listened, hands clasped, leaning against the counter, eyes narrowing slightly, but never raising his voice. When she finished, he took a slow sip of water, set the glass down carefully, and asked, "That the place with the gray brick building, manager named Cliff?" She nodded. He did not respond right away. He stood tall, reached for his phone, and made a call. "Yeah. Hey, it's Nate. I need the number for that delivery service we used last quarter, the one out of Irving." "Yeah, that's the one." "Cool. Text it to me. Appreciate it." Jasmine folded her arms, watching him. "You're not going to show up there and cause a scene, right?" Nathaniel gave a small smile as he pulled a black garment bag from the closet. "No, I'm just going to remind him who he's dealing with." She shook her head, half amused, half wary. "You're so dramatic." He kissed her forehead. "I don't need to yell. People like that don't forget silence, especially when it costs them something." Jasmine knew her husband well enough to understand what his calm meant. When Nathaniel grew quiet, It was not avoidance. It was strategy. He was planning, not reacting, and she understood that he was about to respond in a way the man of Flagstone would never forget. The next morning, the sky was heavy with clouds, the kind of overcast that makes the world feel like it is holding its breath. Jasmine moved through her routine, distracted, her mind circling around Nathaniel's stillness. At breakfast, Devon slung his backpack over his shoulder and paused when he saw her. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm fine, baby. Just thinking." He shifted awkwardly, then said, "I'm sorry about yesterday. You were just trying to do something good for me." Jasmine interrupted gently. "Stop. You didn't do anything wrong. That wasn't your fault." Devon nodded, grabbed a banana, and headed out the door. When the house grew quiet again, Jasmine found herself staring at a piece of junk mail she had not read. She set it down, finally, letting the emotions rise. Yesterday had not been the first time she was disrespected, but something about the smugness of that man, the way he said, "We don't serve politicians like you," as if it were a badge of honor, felt heavier. It was not just about her. It was about Devon. It was about what he had witnessed, that a black woman could walk into a space and be told without hesitation, "You don't belong." Jasmine did not post about it. She did not call the news. That was not her way. But last night, when Nathaniel laid his suit across the bed and set his cufflinks beside his watch, she knew he was preparing for something. Not revenge, not spectacle, but a lesson, a reminder that silence, when wielded with wisdom, can shake the ground more than rage ever could. At noon, her phone buzzed with a message. "Be home around fear. Let Devon know." She stared at it for a moment before replying. "Got it. Everything okay?" No reply. "Just read receipts." Jasmine sighed, went about her errands, but deep inside she knew the journey had just begun. What started as rejection in a car dealership was about to become a lesson that would echo far beyond Garland. Because Nathaniel was moving, not as a man out for payback, but as a man who understood the oldest truth, that when dignity is under attack, the most powerful answer is not fury. It is presence. It is class. It is a silence so heavy it forces the world to listen. The morning at Flagstone Auto Group began like any other. The sky above Garland was gray, heavy, with the kind of clouds that make people speak a little softer, move a little slower. Inside the dealership, the air conditioning hummed steadily, the faint scent of polished leather drifting from the showroom cars. Salesmen in pastel button-downs leaned over desks, tapping on keyboards, pretending to be busy when no customers were watching. It was a scene rehearsed so many times, it almost seemed ordinary. And yet, beneath that hum of routine, there was something different. Attention carried over from the day before, when their manager had sent a congresswoman out of the door with words that clung to the air like smoke. Some of the staff had recognized her face from television. They knew Jasmine Crockett was not just another customer. They knew the way Cliff Bosworth had looked at her, and they had felt the awkward silence that followed. No one said it aloud, but everyone remembered. It was the kind of memory that gnaws at the edge of your thoughts when the room falls quiet. By midday, the ordinary had begun to fray. A soundless presence rolled onto the lot. It was not the roar of a truck or the stutter of a used sedan. It was the gliding arrival of a car designed not to shout but to dominate simply by existing. A black Rolls Royce Phantom slid across the asphalt like a shadow too heavy to ignore. It came to rest in the space marked manager, only a place reserved for authority, through the glass windows. Heads turned, one by one. Conversations faltered. Phones lowered mid-scroll. A nervous chuckle broke out at one desk, quickly silenced. "Whose car is that?" Someone whispered. Another muttered, "That's him. That's her husband." The showroom felt smaller, the air thicker. The car door opened with a quiet click. Nathaniel Crockett stepped out. and the silence deepened. He did not hurry. His black suit was cut sharp, his pocket square folded with precision, his shoes polished until they gleamed against the muted light. He buttoned his jacket slowly, the way a man does when he has all the time in the world. There was no need for swagger, no need for raised voices. His presence was enough. Nathaniel walked toward the doors, unhurried, his stride measured, steady, the kind of walk that says, "I belong here, whether you agree or not." The receptionist froze, hand resting on the phone, unsure whether to greet him or stay silent. The younger salesmen glanced at one another, shifting in their seats. No one dared to approach him. He did not come to ask. He came to wait. Inside his office, Cliff Bosworth had been sipping coffee, half reading an email, when he caught sight of the Phantom parked squarely in his space. He stiffened. For the first time in a long while, the ground beneath his confidence shifted. He adjusted his collar, straightened his shoulders, and walked out, his expression already strained. He had expected anger. He had expected yelling, but the sight of Nathaniel standing calm, composed, unbothered, that unsettled him more than rage ever could. Cliff crossed the floor, arms folded tightly. "Can I help you?" he asked. Though his tone betrayed a defensive edge, Nathaniel reached into his inner pocket and produced a slim business card. He held it out. Steady, deliberate. "That's my name," he said. "I believe you met my wife yesterday." Cliff blinked, his lips parting before words found him. "The congresswoman," he stammered. Nathaniel did not answer. Silence stretched, long enough to force Cliff to feel it pressing on his chest, desperate to fill the void. Cliff began, "Look, it's not what it looked like. We have policies." And sometimes, Nathaniel tilted his head slightly. His voice, calm but unyielding, cut through the room. "You told her she wasn't welcome because of who she is. That's not policy. That's a choice." The words landed like a weight around the room. The staff tried not to stare, but every ear was listening. Cliff swallowed hard. "I wasn't trying to be disrespectful." Nathaniel's reply came without hesitation. "You succeeded anyway. But I'm not here to argue." Confusion flickered across Cliff's face. "If not argument, then what?" Nathaniel answered the question without raising his tone. "I came here to show you what grace looks like. Yesterday, when you had the chance to treat someone with decency, you chose power instead. So today, I came back with power and gave you the chance to watch it walk away." The words lingered in the air long after he turned. Nathaniel walked back to the Phantom, his pace unhurried. He opened the door, slipped inside, and with the softest hum, the car pulled away. No speech, no scene, no shouting, only silence that roared louder than anger. For a moment, no one in the dealership moved. Then, slowly, the whispers began. "That's gotta be one of the coldest things I've ever seen." A salesman muttered. The receptionist nodded. Her voice hushed, and the loudest without saying a damn thing. Cliff stood frozen, the card still in his hand. His reflection staring back from the Phantom's glossy paint as it vanished down the street. For years he had relied on authority, on bluster, on the assumption that people would not challenge him. But now he found himself challenged by silence. And silence, he realized, it was far heavier than any argument he had ever faced. Back at home, Jasmine was setting the table when the garage opened. Devin shot up from his chair, rushing to the door, eyes wide with anticipation. "Uncle Nate, how was it?" Nathaniel stepped inside, loosened his tie, and placed his phone on the counter. He gave a small smile, the kind that holds more weight than a speech. Handled. Jasmine searched his face and saw what she needed to see. There were no fireworks, no drama, no need for explanation. Whatever message needed sending had already been delivered, and it had landed exactly where it was meant to. The Phantom rolled away from the dealership, its polished body glinting faintly beneath the muted Texas sky. But inside Flaxton Auto Group, the silence it left behind was anything but ordinary. Every member of staff felt it. Every customer sensed it. The air was thick, as though the building itself had been shaken. Cliff Bosworth remained by the doorway long after the car had gone, the business card heavy in his hand. He told himself he was the manager, the authority here. But authority felt hollow when confronted by dignity that refused to bend. He shifted uncomfortably, aware that every eye in the room had witnessed his hesitation. And though no words had been spoken, the verdict was clear. He had lost control of the moment. The younger staff whispered in corners. He didn't even raise his voice. Man just stood there and left him speechless. The receptionist shook her head slowly, as if replaying it in her mind. Moments like that do not fade quickly. They linger, crawling under the skin, demanding to be remembered. For Cliff, the weight of that silence grew heavier by the hour. Every phone call he made, every document he signed, the card sat on his desk, its presence louder than any reprimand. This was not just about a sale lost. It was about reputation, perception, the kind of thing that ripples through conversations in barbershops, churches, and boardrooms alike. And Cliff knew the kind of man who drove a Phantom did not move alone. Meanwhile, back at the Crockett household, Jasmine waited. She had not asked Nathaniel for details when he came home. She had seen it in his eyes, the calm certainty of a man who had delivered exactly the message he intended. Yet, as she sat at the kitchen table later that evening, a quiet unease pressed against her chest. She knew power when she saw it wielded, and she knew silence, when sharpened, could wound deeper than anger. Devon, restless from the day's events, finally blurted out, "What did Uncle Nate do? Did he yell at the guy?" Jasmine shook her head. "No, baby. He didn't need to." Devon frowned. "But how's that supposed to fix anything?" Jasmine exhaled, her gaze soft but firm, because sometimes the loudest voice is the one that doesn't shout. "One day, you'll understand." The days that followed proved her right. By midweek, whispers reached the community. Someone had taken a photo blurry from a distance of the Phantom parked outside Flagstone. The image spread through local blogs, captioned with a line that captured the essence of the moment. Man pulls up in $500,000 car after wife denied service, says nothing, leaves everything. It was not a headline on national news. It did not need to be. The people who needed to hear it already had. In beauty salons and barbershops, the story was retold with a mixture of laughter and reverence. That's how you handle disrespect. Didn't raise a finger, but left a mark. The tale grew legs, carrying with it a quiet lesson. Power is not always noise. Sometimes it is stillness. But at Flagstone, the atmosphere soured. Cliff grew curt with his staff. Snapping at minor mistakes, the younger salesman avoided his office, whispering about the man who had left him standing dumbstruck. Corporate emails began to arrive from the parent company, reminding managers about customer sensitivity and professional discretion. No one named the incident outright, but everyone knew the silence Nathaniel had left behind was working its way through the system, forcing change without a single demand spoken aloud. For Jasmine, the real crisis was not in the dealership, it was in her own reflection. Late at night, sitting in the quiet of her home, she replayed Devon's face as the manager told her she was unwelcome. She thought of the countless moments in her own life when dignity had been tested, courtrooms where men twice her age had sneered at her arguments, panels where she was interrupted before she finished a sentence, flights where her very presence was questioned. She had endured it all, but now, the memory of her nephew watching her walk away gnawed at her heart. She wanted him to see strength, not surrender. Yet she also wanted him to understand that true strength is knowing when not to waste energy on battles designed to humiliate. That balance between fire and restraint was the tightrope she walked every day as a black woman in public life. And now, it was her nephew's turn to learn the lesson. By Friday, a message arrived in Jasmine's inbox. No letterhead, no signature from the top brass, just a plain email from someone in operations at the dealership's parent company. It read, "Congresswoman Crockett, please know that what happened last week does not reflect the values of our organization. We are taking internal steps to review the matter. Thank you for your grace and discretion." Jasmine read it twice. Then she closed her laptop without replying. Because some apologies are not meant to be answered. They are meant to sit, to remind, to weigh on those who send them. Devon noticed the shift in her face that evening. "Was that about the car?" he asked cautiously. Jasmine smiled faintly, shaking her head. "It's about more than a car, baby. Always has been." And in that moment, the crisis revealed itself, not as a failure, but as a turning point. Because what had begun as humiliation was becoming something larger. A story, a leçon, a seed planted in the next generation. And like all seeds, it would take root, not in outrage, but in the quiet soil of dignity. The days after the silent confrontation at Flagstone Auto Group rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. It began as whispers inside the dealership itself, where the younger staff no longer looked at their manager with the same respect. They had seen the exchange. They had witnessed the moment when power shifted without a single raised voice. And once you see such a moment, it cannot be unseen. Cliff Bosworth tried to carry on as though nothing had happened. He barked orders a little louder, typed emails with a little more force, but the weight of the business card still sat heavy on his desk. Each time he glanced at it, he felt a quiet rebuke all over again. It was not just the humiliation of being left speechless, it was the knowledge that others had seen it too. Authority, once cracked, does not repair easily. Beyond the showroom walls, the story took on a life of its own. In barbershops across Dallas, men leaned back in their chairs, shaking their heads with admiration. That's how you do it. Didn't need to shout, just presence. In beauty salons in Garland, women smiled knowingly, recognizing the dignity in Jasmine Crockett's restraint and the weight in her husband's calm. The tale spread, not through headlines or breaking news alerts, but through conversation, the kind of conversation that lingers longer than a trending hashtag. And yet, it did not stop there. For those following Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, latest news, the incident became another chapter in a larger story, a reminder of the quiet battles fought not in parliaments or courts, but in everyday spaces where dignity is tested. It was not written in legislative bills or policy debates. It was written in the silence of a car showroom, in the measured words of a man who refused to be baited into rage. The political ripples soon began to stir. Local journalists, always alert for human stories that reveal broader truths, picked up fragments of the account. A blurry photograph of the Rolls Royce parked outside the dealership found its way onto community blogs. The caption was simple: "Man pulls up in £500,000 car after wife denied service. Says nothing, leaves everything." The photograph did not go viral, but it did not need to. The right people saw it, and the right people understood. In the Crockett household, the impact was quieter, but no less profound. Devon, who had watched his aunt dismissed with cold words, now carried in his memory the image of his uncle standing tall without a shout, without a fight, yet speaking volumes. Children learn not only from what their elders say, but from what they embody. And in Nathaniel's silence, Devon had witnessed a lesson that would stay with him far longer than any lecture, that true strength is measured not by noise, but by restraint. Jasmine herself felt the weight of this legacy. Sitting on her back patio one evening, the soft Texas breeze carrying with it the smell of cut grass. She turned to Nathaniel. "Do you think he got the message?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel looked out across the yard before answering. "He did, but that wasn't the goal." She frowned slightly. "Then what was?" He turned to her, his voice steady. "To show Devon how you handle being disrespected without becoming small. To let him see that you don't have to shout to be heard. That some people aren't worth your energy, but they'll still feel your presence." It was in that moment Jasmine understood. The incident at Flagstone was not just about her dignity or even about racial prejudice laid bare. It was about planting a seed in the next generation. A seed of resilience, of self-respect, of quiet power. Her mind returned to the young students she often spoke to at community centers. The ones who asked how to stand tall when the world tries to shrink you. This was the answer. By the following week, corporate changes began to appear at Flagstone Auto Group. No public apology was ever issued. Cliff's pride would not allow it, but the dealership's policies shifted all the same. Sensitivity seminars were booked. Internal memos stressed professionalism and respect, and quietly, very quietly, the red cap disappeared from Cliff's desk. He never admitted why, but everyone noticed. Meanwhile, in the wider political world, the whispers found their way into speeches. At a community event in Garland, Jasmine was asked by a high school student, "What do you do when someone disrespects you, but you're too tired to fight back?" For a moment she hesitated, tempted to offer the polished answer of a politician, but then she chose truth instead. "Sometimes you don't push back," she told them. "Sometimes you walk away with all your dignity intact, and that silence becomes the loudest sound in the room." I'm not saying be passive, I'm saying choose when to engage and when to elevate. There's a difference. And when you know your worth, you don't need to announce it. You carry it. The room fell silent. Not from confusion, but from understanding. The young faces before her, black, white, Latino, a reflection of the America she served, absorbed her words with a kind of reverence. And in that moment, the personal and the political became one. For those following Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, latest news, the lesson was clear. This was not a story about a car. It was not even a story about a dealership manager's prejudice. It was a story about presence, about dignity under pressure, about the power of silence when wielded with grace. It was about showing a young boy that his worth is not measured by the way others treat him, but by the way he chooses to carry himself. The consequence of that day was not only a tarnished dealership reputation or a quiet corporate memo. It was something larger, something that reached into homes, schools, churches, and conversations across Garland and beyond. It was the reminder that grace is not weakness. Grace is power under control. And sometimes, the most revolutionary act is to walk away with your head high, leaving silence to echo louder than rage. The sun was setting over Garland, Texas, washing the sky in shades of amber and violet. On Jasmine Crockett's back patio, the air was still, broken only by the faint sound of children playing down the street. Nathaniel sat with a glass of water in his hand, his jacket draped neatly over the back of his chair. Jasmine leaned back, her eyes on the fading light, her mind still turning over the events of the past 2 weeks. What had begun as a simple errand for her nephew had become a story told in barbershops, beauty salons, and community centers. It was not just about a denied car purchase. It had become a parable of grace, restraint, and dignity. And though the world outside might soon forget, Jasmine knew the legacy would remain not in headlines or viral posts, but in the quiet lessons passed from one generation to the next. Inside the house, Devon's laughter echoed faintly as he played video games with his cousin. Jasmine smiled to herself. That boy had seen more in the past fortnight than many grown men had in their lifetimes. He had seen injustice, witnessed dignity, and absorbed the weight of silence as a weapon stronger than rage. The lesson was not lost on him. Already, he carried himself with a touch more awareness, a touch more pride. And for Jasmine, that was enough. The following week, Jasmine found herself standing on a modest stage in a community center gymnasium. Rows of folding chairs were filled with high school students, their faces bright with curiosity, hope, and uncertainty about the future. She had been invited to speak about resilience, but as she looked at them, she knew she could not rely on polished talking points. They deserved truth. One young girl raised her hand, her voice trembling with honesty. What do you do when someone disrespects you and you just feel too tired to fight back? Jasmine paused, letting the silence settle before answering. Sometimes you don't push back, she began softly. Sometimes you walk away with all your dignity intact, and that silence that becomes the loudest sound in the room. I'm not saying be passive. I'm saying choose when to engage and when to elevate. There's a difference. And when you know your worth, you don't need to announce it. You carry it. The room grew still. Every student leaned forward, absorbing her words not as a lecture, but as a lifeline. They recognized the truth in her voice. The kind of truth born not from theory but from lived experience. After the talk, a boy named Caleb approached her timidly in the parking lot. "Mom," he said, his voice wavering. "I just wanted to thank you. I've got a teacher who talks down to me, makes me feel small. I didn't know how to handle it, but now I do." Jasmine placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes steady on his. "Don't let anyone make you small, all right? Ever." He nodded, his young face glowing with something new. Confidence, perhaps even defiance. And Jasmine knew that in that simple exchange, the legacy of the Flagstone incident had already stretched far beyond her own household. Meanwhile, at the dealership itself, quiet changes continued. Cliff Bosworth never spoke of what had happened, but his behavior shifted in ways too noticeable to ignore. The red cap that once sat proudly on his desk was gone. His tone with customers softened, not out of kindness, but calculation. Corporate pressure from above was clear. There could be no repeat of what had happened. Staff training sessions were scheduled. Human resources memos circulated. And although Cliff's pride kept him from admitting it, the man who had stood before him in silence haunted his thoughts. In the community, the story took root in unexpected ways. It was retold in sermons, where pastors used it as an example of turning the other cheek without turning away from dignity. It was whispered among parents, reminding their children that strength does not always roar. It became one of those tales that travels quietly, but endures, the kind of story that outlives news cycles and seeps into culture. For Jasmine, the deeper lesson revealed itself in the stillness of her home. Late one evening, she and Nathaniel sat together on the couch, the television flickering with an old film they were not really watching. Devon had taken his newly purchased Camry to a study group, texting her when he arrived, just as she asked. Nathaniel reached over, taking her hand. "Do you think he's proud?" he asked. She tilted her head. "Of the car." He smirked. "Of you?" Jasmine hesitated before answering. "I don't know, but I hope one day, when he's in a room and someone tries to belittle him, he remembers not what I said, but how I stood." Nathaniel squeezed her hand gently, his silence speaking louder than reassurance, because they both knew that this was the true inheritance they were leaving behind, not wealth or possessions, but a standard, a way of carrying oneself in a world that too often tried to shrink them. Weeks passed. Flagstone carried on with business, its showrooms filled once again with the hum of customers and salesmen. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. The weight of silence lingered like a shadow, shaping choices, tempering voices. And though no public apology ever came, the private reckoning was undeniable. In Garland and beyond, The Crockett name carried with it not only political weight but a living testimony of dignity under fire. It was a reminder that grace is not weakness. Grace is strength held in check, power refined, dignity unshaken. It is the kind of strength that does not crumble under insult, does not explode at provocation, but instead stands still until the world adjusts to its presence. For Devon, for Caleb, for the students who had listened with wide eyes, the lesson was set. They would carry it into classrooms, workplaces, and courtrooms of their own. They would remember that day not as a story about a car or a dealership, but as a story about who they could become, and that, above all, was the true victory. The story that began with a quiet Saturday morning errand ended as something far larger than a dispute at a car dealership. It became a meditation on power, dignity, and the weight of silence. For Jasmine Crockett, the incident was not her first encounter with prejudice, nor would it be her last. But it stood apart because of who had witnessed it, her nephew Devon, and because of how her husband Nathaniel chose to respond. In that moment, a family decision became a community lesson. It was no longer about the purchase of a Camry. It was about how one carries oneself when the world attempts to strip away respect. Jasmine had walked out of the showroom with grace, refusing to descend into argument. Nathaniel had returned with presence, showing that silence, when combined with power, can become the loudest rebuke. Together, they had offered Devon, and by extension all who heard the story, a living example of resilience. The lesson rippled outward. In Garland, men at barbershops retold the tale with admiration. Women in beauty salons smiled knowingly at the power of Jasmine's calm. Students in community centers absorbed her words about choosing when to engage and when to elevate. And for Cliff Bosworth, the dealership manager who had tried to humiliate her, the silence became a mirror. He could not escape. Change came quietly. Sensitivity training, altered policies, a vanished cap on a desk. But change came all the same. What remains most striking is that none of this required shouting, protests, or the public spectacle. The Crockett family did not storm the airwaves or call for boycotts. They simply carried themselves with dignity, letting the silence do its work. It was not passivity. It was strategy. It was strength. Tempered with grace, for African American elders, this story carries echoes of long histories of quiet resistance, of moments when silence spoke louder than fury, of lessons passed down about survival with dignity intact. For younger generations, it offers a blueprint of how to navigate a world that still too often seeks to make them small. And for anyone willing to listen, it is a reminder that grace is not weakness. It is power under control. Jasmine herself understood this deeply. She had stood in courtrooms and chambers where her very presence was questioned. She had felt the sting of being underestimated, dismissed, or ignored. But she had also learned that sometimes the greatest victory is not in proving your opponent wrong, but in refusing to let them shape who you are. That is the inheritance she sought to leave Devon, the students she spoke to, and the community she served. And so the story ends, not with a purchase, not with an apology, not even with retribution, but with a standard of carrying oneself with dignity when disrespected, a standard of responding to provocation with silence that echoes louder than rage, a standard that whispers across generations. This is how you stand tall. When the world tries to push you down, the Crockett household returned to its rhythms. Devon drove his Camry to school, learning responsibility. Behind the wheel, Nathaniel returned to his work, steady and deliberate as ever. And Jasmine continued to serve her community, carrying with her the memory of that day as both wound and testimony. But those who witnessed the story, whether in the showroom, in whispered retellings, or through Jasmine's own words, carried something too. They carried a reminder that dignity is not given by others. It is claimed, kept, and protected, and that sometimes the loudest victory is not in the roar of triumph, but in the quiet of restraint. This was never just a story about a car. It was, and always will be, a story about character. And in that story lies a lesson for us all, that grace can change rooms, shift conversations, and echo through generations, not with noise, but with presence, not with fury, but with silence. And in that silence, the world listens.